Well, today, the government has published its first AI white paper, which lays out proposals for new laws, which says it will avoid heavy-handed legislation when it comes to regulating it. And it's going to be up to existing regulators like the Health and Safety Executive to come up with their own approach based on a set of principles that include safety, fairness, transparency. How does that play out in reality? Well, the government says this will mean businesses can grow quickly. Does it go too far, far enough? This will be the debate, won't it, whether you call it light touch or avoiding heavy-handedness. I've got Michael Burstwhistle with me, who's the Associate Director of Law and Policy at the independent research organisation, the Ada Lovelace Institute. Michael, morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning. Thanks for being with us. Elizabeth Clark as well, Chief Executive of Dream Agility, which is an AI company which helps to reduce people's marketing bills. Elizabeth, morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Michael, first up, when this is legislation that could well be on the way, can you just explain to us when you look at what the white paper might have to offer, what its priorities are when it comes to artificial intelligence and its use?
Sure thing. So I think what the government's saying is it wants to take a really context-specific approach to regulating AI. We know that lots of types of AI, lots of models of AI have harms that come with them. You know, if you've got a self-driving car, it could crash. If you've got a medical device, it could misdiagnose. And if it's a chatbot, it could make things up or be deliberately misused to distribute misinformation. So there are sort of documented risks and harms in these systems that are increasingly going to be built into our lives, as you've just been talking about. So it's right that we look at better ways to mitigate that through regulation, and that's really what this paper is doing. We do think there are some pretty significant gaps in that in terms of coverage and the speed that it's going to happen at, as we've seen, ChatGPT and Bard they're in the news so much, they're being built into products we're going to be using every day. So there are things we'd like to see happen faster.
So if you had to sort of summarise your one main concern with this, what would that be?
Firstly, it's not clear that it's going to sort of cover everything. If you're, it's going to rely on existing regulators to deliver this, as you've said. We have a fairly we have a patchy patchwork, if you like, of regulators in the UK, and not all of them cover all areas. So recruitment and employment is somewhere that doesn't have a direct regulator, and there isn't really clear vision for how AI in that sector is going to be regulated particularly well. And we'd like this to really have some sort of proper teeth and resourcing. You talk about legislation, but actually the legislation that could be on the way wouldn't arrive for a year or two. And even then, the sort of what the government has put on the table is pretty minimal, really. It's only a sort of a minimal obligation on regulators to sort of pay attention to these principles. And we'd like to see that beefed up.
Elizabeth, you've got an artificial intelligence company yourself that helps to reduce people's marketing bills. So does this white paper, this laying out of potential laws, mean anything to you?
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's some good talk there, but there's not many forms of AI just exist on their own. You've got platform economics at play. You have, like, for ChatGPT now has an app store in it. You can integrate your app into it. So you've got things like Klarna integrating into it, things like that. So it's not happening on its own, and you can be responsible for your bit, but the bit you're plugging into, how can you be responsible for that bit? So I'll give you an example. Everybody wants net zero. Everybody wants to reduce emissions, reduce waste. If you look at the retail sector at the moment, their returns are running between 30 and 50%. And the smart way of dealing with that isn't by sort of being able to dispatch them all a bit quicker when they come back. It's by stopping advertising to those people in the first place. Now, I can push that data into Google to tell it what I want to do. I need to know nothing about those customers. So I don't know who they are. I don't know where they are. I don't know how old they are. I don't know how much money they earn. Google knows all of that. And I can say, right, the people that do these sorts of purchases, I don't want to advertise to them anymore. They will inevitably be people on low incomes who have wanted free shipping. So they've ordered the highest basket value and then returned all of it, or returned all of it bar one. Now, I can't see what Google's doing. I just know that all of a sudden my returns have dropped, my net basket rate is better, and I can't see who that's impacted. So I can't be responsible for that bit of the AI chain.
And so is there a question mark there over fairness and transparency in that? Is there a fairness in who is advertised to? I guess I'm more thinking the biases that might exist in Google's own data, and it, might not be in the marketing world. It may be in other worlds where we're trying to get information to people, and Google thinks a certain type of people need this information, but actually other people who need it may be omitted just because of the those ingrained biases that we already know exist in these databases.
Yeah, and it's and we in the UK you can have all the laws you want. How on earth are you going to get Google to do that? We've had it with elections, we've had it with COVID. There's a lot of bias there. They do what they want, and we have no control over it. So, as an AI company, all the stuff I invent, I can be responsible for making sure that that's as safe and transparent. And that's the other thing. If there's an area here saying transparent and explainability, organizers developing it need to be able to communicate how and when it's used. That's my IP. I'm not going to tell anybody that. Well, I'd have to kill you. So, where does that come into play? How on earth are we going to do that?
This is a national radio station, Elizabeth. So, don't make promises you can't keep if you're telling the nation. Michael, just on those biases, Michael, what are... we always hear about the concerns about biases within a system when we are relying on a system somehow. What are there major concerns that you might have about prejudices that might come out of the wider use of this, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, we know particularly with these big models like ChatGPT that they're trained effectively on a large section of the internet, and there's a lot of content in there, and a lot of it's pretty harmful and toxic. And so it's that toxicity is going to be represented somewhere in that model's data set. And I guess the key point here is the speed in which those models are being sort of integrated into products that we all use, and the level of transparency that these big companies are actually allowing sort of external independent audit of their systems to check that they're not easily capable of spitting out this kind of content. And so something that the government could be doing is asking for sort of greater sort of monitoring and transparency around the use of those models, and asking those big developers of those models to actually tell government and regulators a lot more about how they work on the inside, and give researchers access to how they work so that it can be tested in that way. Just
briefly, Michael, do you think there should be anything in the regulation that protects jobs? We just had a report yesterday from the big investment bank Goldman Sachs saying artificial intelligence globally could replace the equivalent of 300 million full-time jobs at some point.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, there's no doubt that AI is disruptive technology. Tech-driven job displacement isn't new, but it could happen quite fast with some of the new models we're seeing. And we think it's really important to have a public conversation about who's going to see the benefits of technology, has access to it, what it means for education and skills we're equipping people with. But it's not necessarily a really easy problem to solve with sort of technology regulation directly, because it's really about how the whole economy functions.
I've got Jane Sydenham, who's been with us on the show this morning as well, our investor on the show, investment director at Rathbones Investment Management. Jane, we keep hearing about the potential sort of seismic interruptions that could be made once this is completely mainstream. I mean, it feels like it's getting that way one way or another anyway. Are you starting to see it impact your views on the future of businesses that you invest in?
Yeah, well, we're certainly starting to have all those conversations. I mean, there's obviously the pace of change and development here is incredibly fast. This point about displacing jobs is obviously something that all businesses are thinking about. But there's the more administrative jobs there are, the more likely it is that some of those jobs will be replaced. And professions like the legal profession, where there's a lot of administrative support, again, there might be some changes there. other industries like construction and so on probably won't see that much change. I mean, it's, these things are starting to be thought about, but obviously it's still relatively early days.
It is early days. Who knows how quickly those days will fly by. Michael, thank you so much. Michael Burstwhistle from the Ada Lovelace Institute. And
thanks very much.
Cheers, Elizabeth, as well. Thanks, Michael. Cheers, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Clark, Chief Executive of Dream Agility, that AI company helping people reduce their marketing bills.